Go. We are on, I think. Hello, Alexis.
Hello, Rachel. Tell me about your day.
My day started off fantastically because I spent the morning with you.
The best days always do.
That's right.
Yes.
So my day was, workshop with you. And then I came home and I test drove an electric car, which was very exciting,
Hmm.
which I'm hoping to purchase.
Ah,
And did some other bits and pieces with the family and colleagues on the phone. And now I'm here with you and all of our fantastic followers on Facebook Live.
we have such an exciting topic for you today. It was revealed to me by Rachel only a couple of hours ago, and since then, I can't tell you how much it's lit me up, just the thought of it. In fact, for those of you who don't know how we theme these topics, Rachel typically comes up with an exciting theme, and then we run with it together. We send each other links and we gather. And today we've gathered images and stories for you because we have been we've been listening, both of us, to a group of Jungian analysts who have heavily informed and influenced our thinking. And so I think today's theme is probably inspired by this Jungian life. It's a podcast that both Rachel and myself adore. And the theme for today is shadow and shame. Would you like to introduce the topic, Rachel?
I would, but first I'd like to say how endearing it is that the topic of our shadow and our shame has lit you up so completely. Because it reminds me of a little story in one of Brene Brown's TED Talks where she says she sits on the airplane. People say, what do you do? She says, I'm a researcher. What do you research? I research shame. And people are like, stop talking. And she's like, and I see you.
That's right.
So every time I talk about the topic of shame in a workshop or I bring it up for the first time in clinical practice with a client, most people are like, oh, do we really have to talk about that? Although more and more we are talking about it, I think, in our culture. And you mentioned this Jungian Life, the podcast that you and I adore, as you said, and I don't think that's too strong a word. And if anyone's listening and has Spotify, though I think you can listen to it on their website, this Jungian Life, the three Jungian analysts, all I want to say is if you get addicted to it, I apologize in advance. They talk a lot about all the same sort of topics we talk about: relationships, work, anxiety, shame, and in Jungian psychology, shame and other kind of difficult emotions and impulses and aspects of our personality and ourself live in the shadow. This is the metaphor that they use. And in my work, I do sometimes say to clients, let's bring stuff that's been in the shadow for a long time, let's bring it out into the light. Let's really look at it. Let's bring compassion to these darker, more embarrassing parts of our mind or our life or ourselves so that we can shine the light of compassion and make them workable and integrate them. Now, I'd like to start with a definition of the shadow, if that's okay with you, Alexis.
Yes, please. And before you do, I would just like to invite any of our listeners who were at our workshop today to springboard off where we were only hours ago, because you were, whether you realize it or not, introduced to your shame and a compassionate embracing of your shame simply through being attentive to emotion, especially within your body. So as you hear the definition and as you hear the stories of shadow today and shame, I hope you can deepen based from our platform of the workshop today. Yes, how would you define shadow, Rachel?
Well, I'm actually looking at the Wikipedia page, which says that it's the unknown side of ourselves. Yes. So it's the unconscious aspects of our personality, everything of which a person is not fully conscious. So it's a bit like the dark side of the moon. We know it's there, we can't see it. A quote from Carl Jung, who talked a lot about the shadow, is, The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with us in some form. Cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. The problem of the shadow is difficult because it not only challenges the person, but reminds him, her, at the same time of helplessness and ineffectuality. And so that's really interesting, because I think all of us at some point in our lives would love to believe that we have more control than we actually do. And none of us like to feel helpless or ineffectual. And yet sometimes that is really the truth. We are helpless. We are ineffectual. We are powerless because there are things that are happening around us or even inside of us over which we have very little or no control. So to accept that part is part of the shadow. One more quote here that I'd love to share.
Yes.
It's hard to understand explicitly, and so we kind of talk around it. The quote is this: if we cannot accept the shadow, it can lead to low self-esteem. If an individual brands or labels parts of themselves as dirty or embarrassing, this will lead to negative self-perception. If left untreated or ignored, the negative self-perception will envelop one's entire psyche. And this could produce symptoms such as anxiety or depression. It's important to alleviate shadow insecurities by acknowledging and accepting our shadow traits and working to transform them into more positive aspects of our personality. Now, that sounds very academic, but in my relationships nowadays, I find it much easier to speak with my friends and trusted others and my own therapist about parts of my mind, parts of my psyche that once would have been very difficult for me to speak about, because I would have been embarrassed. They would have been surrounded by shame, and I'm still working on it. But, it gets easier.
Oh, it's so interesting where you've led this conversation, Rachel. The my brief research before this conversation led to such similar thinking, and I did see that definition of the shadow, and even just in fact, you mentioned a photo that you'd taken of your shadow, and it reminded me that the shadow itself is a blank canvas. In fact, it's harmless. It's just a lack of light. But within that, there's so much potential for our imagination. And this is where my mind went. I just ran with this. And when I read also on that Wikipedia page that the shadow is not only individual but collective, that resonated so strongly with me. From my public health perspective, as you know, I've worked with, people who've committed sexual offences, people who've been incarcerated. I've worked with all sorts, and I see them embodying parts of the collective shadow that we have denied, and it's almost like they're left no choice. And then that brings out the victim. So when you talk about helplessness and ineffectuality, that resonates so strongly with all of those victims that live in the collective shadow.
Absolutely. And one of the ways we can work with our own shadow, and in clinical practice, but in our own personal development, is to notice when we're triggered into some aversion response. And as you said, there are people who live in the shadows of our culture, in the shadows of our society. I've worked with a few sex workers. Sex workers live in the shadows of our society. People who've committed sex offences, I've also worked with those people. People who've experienced homelessness, people with disabilities, people who've been sexually assaulted, as I have been. There are many of us actually have aspects of our lives where for a time we lived in the shadow, in the kind of more shameful aspects of our culture, anything that's taboo or stigmatized. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can think of a way in which, or a time in which, they themselves kind of lived in the shadow of our culture. And it's and people who live in those shadows can also trigger us. You know, when we feel the little subtle tinge of stigma coming up in ourselves, it's such a great opportunity to inquire as to why am I being triggered? You know, I mean, even characters like Donald Trump are great figures for us to work with in our psyche, because maybe if we look really deeply into it, we've all got a little bit of everything in us somewhere that we haven't owned. Maybe we all have impulses towards being narcissistic, to being a show off, to being selfish, to being aggressive, you know, and all these other things that we prefer not to acknowledge might be within our capabilities. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Rachel. I have to agree. And that is a key indicator of someone's shadow, of our shadows, is what is it that we cannot accept? I had a conversation with my daughter who has she now has a boyfriend at 14. And so I actually said, look, I probably need to become more accepting of this, but, you know, to become pregnant as a teenager, I just said, it's non-negotiable. And even as I said it, I was like, Lexi, there's probably something for you here to be able to open up to. But, you know, for my daughter, there's that identity for that to happen was just intolerable in my mind. So it says to me that there's something there, and we will invite you at the end of today's conversation to draw an image, if you like, or to dress as your shadow. And I think that's a very simple way for people to recognise where do our conversations go where I just cannot go. There's a wall there, or what members of society around me really trigger me. I think there's a key, a very essential key that if we can move towards enables transformation.
Transformation. That's exactly the word. Can I ask you a question about the story you just told?
Yes, please. I love it when you get juicy, and it scares the Jesus out of me. But yes.
Excellent. You know, one of my old business coach, who was a psychologist, she said to me once, she said, do something every day, one thing that makes you feel like you want to throw up.
Oh, okay. That's pretty intense.
and it was a bit of it was imagery, right? But it was like, do one thing every day that scares you, that's out of your comfort zone. So let me put you out of your comfort zone.
Please bring it. That's what we're here for.
So when you think about your daughter experiencing a teenage pregnancy, what emotions and sensations do you notice come up in you?
See, isn't that interesting? And there's that myth that if I visualize it, it's more likely to happen.
Yeah, that's okay. You notice that thought come in.
I noticed that thought. So, okay, if I let myself go there, is it, wow, okay. Yes, it brings up family shame. Yes. Would my family accept us? It brings up fear of survival in my belonging to the community in which I live and my family.
So that sounds to me like you're aware of some thoughts.
Yes.
That are filled with fear, but, you know, what would my family think? You know, this wouldn't be okay. There's some thinking.
Yes.
And there's some feelings that you would label fear and shame. Where are they in your body?
Definitely central. It's quite hot. A bit irritated or agitated. Not nausea, but kind of the preliminary start of digestive. It's actually digestive constriction. Yeah. So, you know, my daughter has challenged me, and I do find myself going into places that I haven't been, and I do believe it's valuable to go there in my imagination, in preparation. Not that will happen, but to be open to the shadow that I'm otherwise denying.
This is exactly the work. So thank you so much for sharing. I promise you can do this to me next time. So if we can stay with this feeling, sensation, this constriction, this heat, can you make, and all the fear-based storyline, can you make space for that and notice the vulnerability in that?
Yeah, I can. When I make space for it in my abdomen, I notice how I have come to accept my sexuality. I'm not sure if this is relevant, but it feels relevant. And that process is entirely safe when there's open avenues for me to go to others for what I need to, whether it's insight or reflection or understanding of lessons around respect and what sexuality actually is and means, and that process is liberating and powerful, and that it takes a long time, and it starts at probably 14, but it's early days, and it's a healthy, wonderful, it's a wonderful journey, actually.
Okay, so there's a lot there. So if I'm hearing you right, Alexis, it sounds like, and I'm just reading between the lines here now, that you really want and value that your daughter has a healthy experience or relationship to her own sexual development, to her own sexuality. And I'm sensing it's really important that you want to protect her, yeah? And it's about her well-being, I'm guessing, in some way or another. It's about her development, wanting to protect.
Her becoming of a woman. That's right. That's right, Rachel. Yes, I love that you've reminded me that. And as I saw you facilitate in the workshop today, that acknowledgement that beneath even those very strong, potentially overpowering emotions that reside in the shadow, and those aspects of the identity that reside in those murky, dark places, they come even with a positive intent and with a need that is fundamental to all of us. We all need to have a journey of sexual maturation. I mean, even if you're a monk or celibate, there would still be a process of sexual understanding and individuation. And
there's something you want for your daughter. Like, I'm looking for your need and value on her behalf, which is
protection. Yes, you said protection. Yes. And but there's more than that. There's also her natural unfolding, just the timeliness, and that she has an autonomous experience of that, consensuality as a starting point at the very least, but also a self-awareness.
Yes.
Yeah, self-awareness for her.
Yes. So you wish for her to have self-awareness and accurate information so that she's being choiceful, autonomous. And there's something in there about her maturation process that you wish to support and protect.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Really core and really key needs and precious values that underpin your anxiety.
Yes, thank you so much for facilitating that. And the last question on our process today was, can you see the sacredness? And I can feel the sacredness in what you've just held me through, because not days ago this was a no-go zone for me, and yet there's that precious need that's very strong and very deep, and almost so precious and deep that it's so vulnerable, that it's so difficult to go there myself. I know I can, and yet to be held in that is quite a different experience. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my absolute pleasure. I love to help people and take myself and others from, the stories and the thoughts and the judgments and the heaviness of all of that, and the heaviness of the, emotions that are
Out the body,
these emotions, and to settle into what's underneath that, these precious needs, these core values, the thing that is so important to you in the issue. And now I invite you, the last thing, remember, from our process today of compassionate embrace is to return to the original stimulus, in your case, the imagining of a teenage pregnancy. And I wonder if anything shifted for you now when you recall that image.
Well, the first thing is that it's quite ridiculous. I'm seeing like a cartoon teenager, so it's lost its potency. And then if I let that become a real image of my daughter's beautiful face and her becoming womanly body, and how we would come to terms with it, we would be so fine. We'd probably have shitloads of fun. I don't know. I really don't know, but it feels very different. I feel like I could be with her no matter what, and that will enable us to have some conversations that actually are honest, whereas before it was a blank, and it's I feel quite different. So I feel confident about discussing that with her. Not that I won't have some intrepidation, but I feel, having demystified the image and especially having embodied what that means to me, that my relationship to those thoughts is very different.
How interesting it's really interesting, right, to sort of experience a shift from the initial kind of horror movie in the mind.
Well said. Yeah.
I mean, the mind makes lots of horror movies for us, and it holds on to horror movies from the past, creates imagined futures that are horror movies, and yeah, it's interesting that the shift would mean that you could hear yourself saying, if it happened, we would embrace it somehow. It would be okay. Yes. That's quite different to how you first thought about it initially.
Very different. Yes, I'm starting to see the shadow as the boogeyman monster, that when we can't look under the bed. We can't look under the bed because we've created it in the mind. And yet when we look under the bed, it's all over.
Yeah.
Completely. The shadow is harmless when we look her in the eye and see her for who she is.
Yeah. And that actually the content of our shame or our fear that's in the shadows is still coming from a beautiful longing or a beautiful need, as we discussed in our workshop today. And if we can get to the deepest needs that are sitting in the material in our psychic shadow, then we can bring compassion and an embrace and acceptance of those needs. Now, Mia has asked a question which relates to this, and I'd be interested. Can I share that with everybody?
Please do.
So Mia has said, Mia, who I believe was at our workshop today online.
Amount, then yes, hey Mia.
Yes, so thank you for coming, Mia. She says, shame has kept me as a person in the shadows, always feeling like I need to be a wallflower or a grey rock, so I appear uninteresting. And today triggered that feeling for me during the workshop. What is a small thing that could be done to help ourselves in these moments when we feel shame intensely, to talk ourselves off that ledge? And I think that's a great question, because we do need practices that are in the moment. All the theory in the world is no good to us if in the moment we don't know what to do when we're flooded.
So yes, Rachel, how would you support Mia in acknowledging that wallflower shadow that she is sitting with, and acknowledging How might she facilitate that transformation?
Well, she's already done the first thing, which is naming it. She said it's shame. She knows what she's dealing with. So she's done step one, which is naming shame. You know, we have shame about our shame, but when we learn to go, oh, this is a negative self-evaluation that I'm making, it's a negative story that I have about myself, that's all shame is. It's a negative story about ourselves that leaves us with a particular profile of sensations or feelings that tend to make us shut down. They're heavy on cortisol. It tends to bring a kind of pressure or heaviness into our system. And having a word for it. I loved what you said today, Alexis. If you know your neighbor's name, you're more likely to say hello to them. I thought that is so true. It's been my experience. You know, hey, Pat. Before I knew Pat's name was Pat, I would just kind of hope he didn't see me looking at him. So having...
And for our listeners, the connection is, if you can name it, then the chances of a positive relationship are much higher. So if you name your shadow, you name your emotion, then the relationship is more likely to be one that's constructive and helpful and beneficial, and you share lawnmowers.
Exactly. So until you have a name for it, it's so much harder to work with. So we name it. It's shame. Step one, you've done that, Mia. Step two is speaking about it, which is also what you're doing here with us now. And like I said earlier on the video, like I've learned to speak about the stuff that was once in my shadow, and it still sneaks back into the shadows. But when I know who I can trust, friends like Alexis, my partner, my therapist, then I can speak about the stuff that's embarrassing, that's hard to speak about, that I probably wouldn't speak with just anyone about. But if I trust the person, and then I'll gently let myself be seen in that difficulty, in that struggle, in that embarrassment, in that anxiety. And that's step two, you know, connecting with another trusted person. Now, step three, Mia, and I really want to apply this to your experience today at the workshop, is kind of zooming out and looking at the broader situation. Now, Mia was in our workshop, but on Zoom. And so if you felt like a bit of a wallflower in our workshop, there were realities to that. You actually kind of were on the periphery of our processes being online. And it's the first time Alexis and I have had a workshop with people zooming in. And so it was difficult, and that would not have helped your experience there. And we also need to acknowledge
it did help.
Oh, yeah, it did. It really helped you feel
perspective. Yeah.
And we will get better and better at our technology. And I'm sure that in your past, as many of us have had, there have been realities within your family, your circles, and in the culture for all of us that bring shame. You know, as females, we've often got shame around our physicality, our bodies. So we can apply critical awareness to kind of remember it's not my fault, because shame says, oh, it's all me, I'm defective, it's my fault. Whereas zooming out, we can say, oh, there's bigger, you know, I don't have that much control for it to all be my fault. There's bigger forces at play here.
Absolutely, there are. There's realities.
There's realities that are triggering my shame, and there's layers of realities from the big culture to the micro cultures of our social circles, you know, to the everyday kind of
social structures,
and then the everyday experiences, much of which is out of our control. And then the more we speak our shame, the more we accept what's in the shadows, the more we can integrate the difficult stuff, the shadowy material, ongoing, the more we can have some community around this, which is why Alexis and I are doing what we do. The more resilient we become, and the less shame has a stronghold on us. I hope that answers your question, Mia.
It's interesting as you talk, Rachel, and I'm aware that we need to start our closure, but there's so much in the shadow and shame. A lot of the work that I do within the body is at the base level, and it probably makes sense actually to demonstrate this. But I see in bodies, in my practice as a yoga therapist and a body worker, that there is a lot of contraction between the tailbone and sit bone. This area is known as the coccygeus. And most people I have found, probably through sitting, have the tailbone tucked under and this area perpetually bound. And if you think of the animal that tucks the tail, the dog that's shamed of itself, it's shamed by, sometimes by its owner even, it tucks that under. And the bodies I see are perpetually walking with this, which then leads to all sorts of laxness and misstructuring through the digestive system and the reproductive system. And so one simple practice beyond those that we did today that you mentioned, Rachel, around breathing towards the experience and softening, even a visual of compassionately embracing and dropping into this lower part of the body. I mean, if you think about taboos around sexuality, even around bowel movements and urination, and even the fact that we sit in our culture, we literally compress these parts of the body. They are that when they're compressed, there's a lack of circulation, there's a lack of awareness. There's so much in this shadow and shame that lives in the body. So even right there, you've got 3 body-based practices that you can apply anywhere. And finally, I must say that, we had so many exciting stories and images that came in our introduction when Rachel and I spoke before this conversation. She was telling me about Star Wars. So I'm even wondering, Rachel, if we might have a part 2 to this, because I've also got stories of Persephone, the goddess of the underworld.
I was hoping we could get to some mythology, and it's a shame that we don't have time. I have to go in a minute because I'm actually having a dinner with my team at North Brisbane Psychologists. We're all going out for dinner and I'm meeting them in half an hour and it takes 20 minutes to get there. So that's exciting for me, but disappointing that we can't keep going. But yes, I'd love to talk mythology, the shadow in mythology, and Star Wars. George Lucas, who wrote Star Wars, was heavily influenced by Jungian psychology and mythology. And if anyone's seen Empire Strikes Back, they'll remember that scene where Luke Skywalker fights Darth Vader only to force his mask off and see that it's himself. So he has to face the darker aspects of his own psyche in order to mature and become a whole, more integrated, mature person. And so Star Wars is full of wonderful metaphors, symbols, and teachings in a way about this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one tiny bit of homework, because we are very studious and we love homework. This is a fun one. It is just to take a bit of pen and paper and draw the images. Draw an image of what's come up today. So the wallflower was a lovely one, Mia. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I have images of Carly, and the way I dressed today was inspired by my shadow,
I wondered about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, she's a total.
Do you want to see the image I found on Google?
Yes.
My shadow.
Oh, it's almost like a drawn, it's a cat, witchy. Oh, I love it.
Something just stood out to me about it. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to see if I can make friends with her over the next few days. I reckon she can probably chill out a bit if she gets a bit of love.
We're here for you, baby. If anyone can do it, you can. I've got so many quotes and so much to share on this. So I so look forward to next week.
Let's do part 2 next Sunday.
Gorgeous. Rachel, I love your work. I am honoured. I'm honoured to work with you like this. It makes my heart sing, and I actually don't know what I'd do without you. These are the conversations that fuel me. So thank you, my dear colleague and friend.
Wow, that's lovely to hear. Thank you so much. I feel similarly. And I hope that you've noticed my candles flickering in the background here, and I'll bring them back with me next Sunday. I'll have like a whole room full of candles for our part 2 on the shadow.
Okay, don't get our hopes up. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you have enjoyed today's conversation, and please do take a pen to paper. You might be quite interested in who appears on your page.
Yeah, and bring them next Sunday. Maybe you could like
Oh.
post a photo in the comments and I can check them out as we're speaking.
In fact, I'll post these images that I collected
in the comments.
Yeah, in the comments below for inspiration, but let it come from inside you.
Yeah. Great. I'd love to see people's sketches. All right. I'm running away.
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay.
Have a lovely evening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.